An alleged drone strike was able to pierce the shell of the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl in Ukraine. Now look, this was an unknown cause. We don't know who is really behind this. They're blaming Russia for it, of course. But this took place right after President Donald Trump was trying to negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And in other news, the Trump administration is promising to launch an investigation into California's high-speed rail project that has spent billions and billions of dollars, but has still not gotten off the ground. And also, meanwhile, something that went under the radar recently was that Trump issued an executive order reinstating members of the U.S. military who had been discharged for refusing to comply with the vaccine mandate. We'll be talking about these topics and more today, so let's jump into it. Now, first off, an alleged drone attack was able to launch a strike on the Chernobyl nuclear reactor in Ukraine, and it was even able to pierce the shield of the facility that nearly caused a region-wide nuclear disaster during the Cold War. Now, this attack took place right as President Donald Trump was trying to negotiate a peace deal. Why would anybody do it at that time? And of course, that's the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. It also took place amid a fresh wave of pushback suddenly over an effort in Europe where different countries want to keep the war going suddenly. Now, look, first off, on the Soviet-era nuclear facility, there's the usual blame game around it. You know, Russia is claiming Ukraine did it. They say we didn't do it. Ukraine is saying Russia's behind the attack. We don't actually know. The fog of war is very much real. We've seen in past incidents both countries blame the other for attacks. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, as we have seen. Sometimes it's just another country entirely. Now, here's what we do know so far, though. This is BBC. They say a Russian drone, allegedly, has hit the protective shield over Chernobyl's damaged nuclear reactor, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said. He says the overnight strike at the site of the world's worst nuclear accident caused a fire that has since been extinguished, he added. And notes the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, said radiation levels inside and outside Chernobyl were normal and stable for Chernobyl. But later, the plant's chief engineer, it says, he said the possibility of radioactive substances leaking now exists. And Russia has denied any claims it attacked Chernobyl, stating its military does not strike Ukrainian nuclear infrastructure. And, quote, any claims that this was the case do not correspond to reality, they say. Now, look, in reality, what we do know is that there are some countries that seem very interested in keeping this war going. In fact, right after Trump came out and tried to negotiate peace, a lot of European countries are trying to stop it now. A big criticism of Trump on that is the terms of the deal that he seems to be negotiating. He's making it so there will be no future U.S. involvement in Ukraine. America's pulling out. They're saying, Europe, you need to start pulling your own weight. You get in there. Germany in particular, they've been criticizing this. They say that, one of the narratives has been that this deal is a kind of forced peace. Germany is saying there can be no peace deal that does not involve, future involvement of the United States. They seem to be interested in keeping the United States there. The United States is saying you guys are more than capable of doing it yourselves. Start paying your own share of your defense budgets. Of course, Germany does, but other countries don't. But it would also not see Ukraine get back all the land it lost to Russia since the previous conflicts. And of course, those go back to like 2014. Meaning Ukraine is kind of losing out. Russia's probably gaining a lot more than some of these countries would not like to see. And it would also force European countries to play more of a role in their future defense in the region, and would also see many of those countries probably having to put their own troops in Ukraine to maintain this kind of new line of peace, including possibly France, including possibly the UK. It also seems now that Ukraine and other countries, they're looking at a possible continuation of the conflict. They're saying, well, how do we keep this war going without the United States? The Sun said this in the UK. It said, Ukraine's brave president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has today called for the creation of an army of Europe to take on Russia. And Zelensky spoke about his ambitions to create a continental military force at the Munich Security Conference as he blasted Vladimir Putin as a, quote, liar, weak, and predictable. It says the 47-year-old Ukrainian leader made the comments as he notably left out Washington's involvement in the European Army dream, meaning the Army of Europe will not include the United States Army, right? And notes it comes amid Donald Trump urging Ukraine to find a resolution to end the war quickly. And they seem to be buffing up the military through a regional strategy instead. Although you could also argue that when they will go to the negotiating table, they need to have some cards to play. Maybe that's the reason for it. Who knows? But it seems this is at least one plan for the conflict. Maybe it could keep going, right? It's possible they could keep the war, ongoing without the involvement of the United States. And in an interview with NBC's Meet the Press yesterday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky suggested this may be his decision. Keep it going. Although his comments, they do relate to his terms with the pending peace deal. Watch.
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults and children and everybody. It can't be so. This is the war in Ukraine against us, and it's our human losses. And we are thankful for all the support, unity between USA, in USA, around Ukraine support, bipartisan unity, bipartisan support. We're thankful for all of this, but there is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us.
Also, alongside this, the Trump administration is sending some strong messages to European leaders right now. Vice President J.D. Vance, he spoke at the Munich Security Conference on Friday, and he spoke about the rising wave of populism in Europe, including in their own countries, Germany, UK, and others, as realities that are the will of the people, that are ironically democracy, and that are coming about through the actual democratic systems. And he criticized these countries for trying to crush that, saying that, you criticize fascism, but you're destroying democracy. How does that line up? He criticized the policies of many of these countries on mass censorship. He said that many of them are deviating from the very basic values of freedom that they used to represent. Watch.
Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
He also noted some of the regional pushback from Europe against Elon Musk, who some leaders have criticized for allegedly interfering with their politics. Germany, for example, they're criticizing Elon Musk for giving a platform to the AfD, one of the new populist parties. The UK is criticizing Elon Musk for giving a platform to talk about the migrant rape gangs, which they're trying to cover up. And in response to this, J.D. Vance said, quote, if the American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you can survive a few months of Elon Musk, suggesting that we have an American influencer criticizing your policies. You had a European influencer criticizing our policies. And of course, Elon Musk is also a government official now. Now, he also went on to note that democracy rests on this sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. Watch.
And trust me, I say this with all humor. If American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, You guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what German democracy, what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice.
In other news, California's been talking about building a high-speed rail for, well, years. And the plan is to have a train going from Sacramento to San Francisco and all the way down to San Diego. And there's also a plan to have it run from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Great idea, right? The issue is, look, despite business plans going back to 2008, actually, and billions and billions of dollars spent, not only do they still not have the high-speed rail, but the cost and the timeline keeps growing. And now, well, we may finally get some answers on just why that is. Where'd all that money go? The Trump administration is now launching an investigation into California's high-speed rail project that could also see the United States government, Trump, pull all the money back from the federal government, saying, well, what'd you spend it on? The Epoch Times said this: President Donald Trump told reporters on February 4th that his administration will investigate the long-delayed California high-speed rail project, which was authorized by voters in the state in 2008. It says California has dedicated billions of dollars to the project so far, yet no track has been laid. And according to recent California High-Speed Rail Authority disclosures, 38 structures and 39 miles of guideway have been completed after spending $13.6 billion. And speaking from the Oval Office, Trump said it is the worst managed project he has seen and hundreds of billions of dollars over budget. And notes the state is currently focused on building 171 miles of train line from Merce to Bakersfield in California's Central Valley. And from the proposed Los Angeles area station to San Francisco, the overall project is expected to cost up to $128 billion now, which for those keeping track is $95 billion more than originally projected. So how do you make it that much more money and you still haven't really shown anything tangible from it, right? Now look, although Trump is now looking to investigate the rail program, this actually isn't the first time he's done this. He did it before. He also pulled some of California's budget for it, back in 2019 during his first term in office. In fact, this was AP May 2019, toward the end of Trump's first term in office. It said the Trump administration canceled nearly $1 billion Thursday in federal money for California's high-speed rail project, further throwing into question the future of the ambitious plan to connect Los Angeles to San Francisco. California Governor Gavin Newsom immediately pledged to take the administration to court. We're going to take Trump to court, he said, though the state has not yet filed a lawsuit. And notes the action is illegal and a direct assault of California, Newsom said in an emailed statement at that time. And notes this is California's money, approved by Congress, and we will vigorously defend it in court. The official word of the funding cancellation by the Federal Railroad Administration came several months after President Donald Trump's first threatened to withdraw it. Now, of course, you could argue, yeah, it was approved by Congress, but was it spent on what it was approved for? That's going to be the big question. And now, look, things are also a bit different. When it comes to the budget, California is kind of in a tough place right now. California, they don't just need federal money for their rail project that hasn't yet laid a single track yet, but they also need money to help rebuild from Los Angeles fires. And currently, instead of spending money on that, they're spending money on hardening the state against Trump's policies, right? They're looking to sue Trump and fight against Trump, while, of course, they have like half of LA in shambles right now. But what Trump is talking about this time around is not just pulling the budget, right? Because he's talking like $3.5 billion they might take back from California just on this alone. He's also talking about investigating what's going on with the project, why it's sucking up taxpayer dollars with basically nothing to show for it. Why are they saying a $95 billion more, they need now all of a sudden, and the timeline keeps going forward? And Trump's timing with talking about the rail project also just happened to align with him meeting with California Governor Gavin Newsom about the fires. Interesting timing, right? Newsweek, February 4th said this: Governor Gavin Newsom is heading to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Trump administration in the aftermath of Southern California's deadly and destructive fires, while the president has threatened to investigate the state's high-speed rail project. It's the last month at the time, California GOP Assemblywoman Alexandra Macedo floated a bill that would take annual funding meant for construction of the high-speed rail project and divert it to new water infrastructure and wildfire prevention projects. Maybe they need that more, who knows? Now, it's California GOP Assemblyman David Tenjipa said on X, "We have been left with no idea for how California plans to finish the high-speed rail, making Fresno an architectural graveyard rather than the epitome of technological development." He noted that AB 377, that policy for that, requires California to disclose its financial plans and budget to finish the high-speed rail. And another official, Representative Vince Fong, a California Republican, also said on X, quote, "Absolutely correct. California's mismanaged high-speed rail project is a complete mess. There are better uses of these precious tax dollars." And another official, the chief financial officer of the Rail Authority, Jamie Metalka, said in a news release on January 23rd, quote, "The benefits of investing in a high-speed rail system continue to ripple through the California economy. And this project is creating meaningful partnerships and jobs, lifting up disadvantaged communities, and supporting greenhouse gas reduction goals." Although it's not clear what they've actually built yet to achieve any of that. Now, look, with that said, Trump is also seeming to be interested now in leveraging federal money to California to push for other policies. And maybe that's what's really behind this, right? Trump right now is saying, California, you get so much money from the federal government, you now need even more money. Why are you spending it on things that are not showing any results? Why are you spending it on things to challenge the President of the United States? Why are you not spending it on maybe, getting water functioning in Los Angeles so if a fire breaks out, you can actually put it out, right? He's suggesting these things. Why are you not fixing your water problems? Why are you dumping water into the ocean when that could be used for other things? Why are you, for example, not carrying out proper property management and maybe clearing underbrush and such to make sure fires like this don't happen? He's suggesting the state maybe not using its funds for the things that really matter, right? That's the argument. And he's now saying that if California wants the money to fix itself, to build back Hollywood and everything else, well, there are some things he wants in return. He wants California to change its environmental laws to free up more water for the state. And the other big policy he wants is something pretty big as well. Trump is demanding that if California wants that federal money, he wants California to start requiring voter ID in elections. He mentioned this early on with the discussion on the California disasters. Watch what he said back in January 24 to reporters when he stopped in Asheville, North Carolina to check on the disaster there before he went to California. Have a look.
I want to see two things in Los Angeles: voter ID, so that the people have a chance to vote, and I want to see the water be released and come down into Los Angeles and throughout the state. Those are the two things. After that, I will be the greatest president that California has ever seen. So I want two things. I want voter ID for the people of California, and they all want it. Right now, you don't have voter ID. People want to have voter identification. You want to have proof of citizenship. Ideally, you have one-day voting, but I just want voter ID as a start, and I want the water to be released, and they're going to get a lot of help from the U.S. Thank you very much.
He reiterated this point the same day at a different press event. Watch.
Well, in California, I have a condition. In California, we want them to have voter ID so the people have a voice, because right now the people don't have a voice because you don't know who's voting, and it's very corrupt.
And it seems Trump hasn't forgotten. He raised the issue again in a Truth Social post on February 11th with the point about the state of California and their election system. Trump said this, quote, California just stopped counting their votes on the 2024 presidential election. February 11th, folks. They just finished counting their votes. They only just now finished. He said voter ID is totally barred. In fact, it is illegal for voting officials to even ask to see a person's identification in California, of course. He said this cannot be made up, pointing out, of course, the need he believes there is for voter ID in California. Now, we'll have to see whether he, keeps voter ID as a condition in California. If they want federal money, maybe for the fires and the building back, if they want federal money for their rail system, which now needs, $95 billion on top of what they already said they needed. And of course, as the timeline for that keeps on growing. But it's also likely we're going to be hearing a lot more about this, especially as the rebuilding efforts start. Now, in other news, though, state lawsuits are now starting against Dr. Anthony Fauci with a likely review of the effect of COVID policies, the impact that issues like the vaccine mandates are being raised again. And it was recently revealed that Vice President J.D. Vance may have seen the real-world impact of at least one of the worst parts of these policies firsthand. New York Post said this. It said a 12-year-old Indiana girl who is related to Vice President J.D. Vance has been barred from a spot on a heart transplant list because she has not been vaccinated against COVID-19 and the flu, according to her parents. And it's the girl, Adeline Deal, a distant relative of the VP by marriage through his half-sibling, was born with two rare heart conditions that her family knew would one day require a transplant. Her mother, Janine Deal, told the Cincinnati Enquirer this, and it said Adeline, who was adopted from China when she was 4, was treated at Cincinnati Children's Hospital for nearly 10 years. And her parents hoped she would get the transplant there, but the hospital requires transplant patients to be vaccinated. And they declined to make an exemption, even when told it goes against the family's religious beliefs as non-denominational Christians, the parents said. Now, basically, that 12-year-old girl, she was denied a heart transplant because she refused to get the COVID shot. Her decision was related to the religious beliefs of her and her family, which is actually becoming a key part of this debate, especially as Donald Trump has created a new initiative to investigate religious persecution of Christians. Now, the cases are not just about medical freedom, right? They're also about religious belief. And on this point also, this was recently highlighted when Trump issued his January 27th executive order reinstating members of the U.S. military who had been discharged, kicked out of the military, for refusing to comply with the vaccine mandate. For a lot of them as well, and I spoke to many of them also, that was a religious decision. The White House said this. On August 24, 2021, the Secretary of Defense mandated that all service members receive the COVID-19 vaccine. The Secretary of Defense later rescinded the mandate on January 10, 2023. It went on for close to 2 years, right? And as the vaccine mandate was an unfair, overbroad, and completely unnecessary burden on our service members. Further, the military unjustly discharged those who refused the vaccine, regardless of the years of service given to our nation, after failing to grant many of them an exemption that they should have received. The federal government redress of any wrongful dismissals is overdue. Now, briefly on this point, remember, Trump has maintained his stance on the vaccines. He supports them. Trump was the one who did Operation Warp Speed, which fast-tracked them. Trump has argued that he saved a lot of people's lives, meaning he's not against the vaccines themselves. But what he has been against is the mandates that forced people to get them, even if it violated their religious views. Now, on this point, this is what he said in the release as well. He wants to have redress. And he said, quote, consistent with the policies announced in Section 1 of this order, the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Homeland Security, as appropriate, shall take all necessary action permitted by law to make reinstatement available to all members of the military, active and reserve, who were discharged solely for refusing to receive the COVID-19 vaccine and who requested to be reinstated. It notes it as well to enable those service members reinstated under this section to revert to their former rank and receive full back pay, benefits, bonus payments, or compensation. And to also allow any service members who provided a written and sworn attestation that they voluntarily left the service or allowed their service to lapse according to appropriate procedures, rather than be vaccinated under the vaccine mandate, to also return to service with no impact on their service status, rank, or pay. On that point, I personally spoke with some service members who lost their entire retirement because of their refusal, because their religious views were more important to them than getting the benefits of all the years of service. Some of them would have had very good jobs. Some of them would have had fantastic retirement packages. They gave up all of that, their entire futures on that, in order to not get the vaccine that they say violated their views, right, their beliefs. Now, look, what's likely going to happen on that front as well as, others when it comes to people who are affected by the vaccine mandates is the cases could be, reviewed for potential civil rights violations. Because on that front, right, the Trump administration is now reviewing many policies that hired people or fired them or did not even look at them in the first place because of their race, because of their gender, or for other potential criteria like, their beliefs. These would be civil rights violations. And the argument now is that many DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, were carried out in violation of the law. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a 1-minute break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. There are now investigations being carried out into DEI and also other programs like it that may have violated the civil rights of Americans. The Trump administration right now, they're investigating the many policies that were hiring people based on their race, based on their gender, based on their religious beliefs, based on their political views maybe. And they're arguing that if you were doing that, even if you were saying you were doing it for racial equity or wherever else, if you were discriminating against another group of people in order to do that, including, for example, having race quotas or whatever else that had to take that into consideration, then you may have violated people's civil rights. And the argument right now is that many of those DEI programs were actually done in violation of the law. That includes if they discriminated against men. Yes, men are a gender. They are still a gender. That includes if you discriminated against white people. Yes, they are a race, meaning you cannot discriminate against them without violating the law. Or against, straight people because, yes, that is a sexual preference. And you also could be punished if you discriminated against Christians because, yes, they are a religious view, and if you did that, you violated their civil rights, even though under the last 4 years, this was kind of being, the main policy, ironically. Look, under the Constitution, government agencies are not allowed to discriminate based on race, gender, sexual orientation, or creed. And this is now leading to many people getting fired for carrying out the DEI policies. All these people went to school for DEI or whatever else. They could lose their jobs, and a lot of them are in the government right now because they're being accused of violating people's civil rights. And it's also sparking new investigations into what effect the policies may have had. One of the big areas that has come into focus is the Federal Aviation Administration and the air traffic controllers, because We've seen, again, airplane crashes and really terrible disasters, and people are saying, well, what caused this? One of the areas coming into focus right now is the lack of people and the fact that they were hiring people and pushing out white people. They were hiring based on race. Just the News said this, quote, current and former air traffic controllers warn that the Federal Aviation Administration's hiring practices and, quote, immunity program have led to problems such as those that may have resulted in the recent mid-air collision near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. It says the FAA's focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI hiring practices, has resulted in the employment of less qualified air traffic controllers, ATCS, and a staffing shortage, former ATCs say. Now, on that point, they're not saying that white people were more qualified. They're saying that people who were scoring higher were basically not even allowed in because they might not have fit the racial quotas that had to be filled. And so they were pushing out the people who were more qualified, hiring people who are less qualified based on nothing else than racial discriminatory practices. Now note that this, in addition to an immunity program that fails to hold ATCS accountable for their mistakes, are likely contributing factors. American airline planes collided with a military helicopter on January 29th that resulted in both aircraft plunging into the Potomac River near the Washington, D.C. airport. All 67 people on board died. People were killed because of these policies, potentially. And notes the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, are investigating the incident. Now we'll see what that actually means. Maybe there's manslaughter charges, underway for the people behind this. Maybe it'll just be a review of the FAA and other things. We'll have to see, right? But it does note the FAA was warned in a 2023 report that air traffic controllers were increasingly making last-minute flight adjustments to deal with traffic and shortages of controllers, and a trend that raised safety concerns. One of the big problems is this: they can't hire people as quickly as people quit the job because it's a very high-stress job. And if you're hiring people who are unqualified to begin with, well, there's a higher chance of them quitting, meaning there's a shortage in staff because the hiring process is slower than the rate of people leaving the job. There's fewer people, and so instead of fixing that by hiring the people who are actually qualified, they're not doing it. That's the argument here. Now notes this: the safety expert report that warned America's air traffic control system is suffering from quality control issues and staffing shortages that put safety at risk. Former ATCS have pointed to the FAA's change in hiring practices under the Obama administration as partly to blame for the current state of air traffic control, which led to a class action lawsuit that is still ongoing. Now look, there are actually other lawsuits now also. The Mountain States Legal Foundation, which is based in Colorado, they're actually suing the FAA over its hiring policies. And they allege that over 900 applicants were rejected for being, quote, too white. They were rejected for being too white, they say. It notes that William Trackman, the foundation's general counsel, was interviewed by our sister media, NTD. Watch this.
I'm representing Mountain States Legal Foundation as part of a class action on behalf of 900 plus would-be air traffic controllers. And so we brought this suit based on the FAA's change in its hiring practices. So it used to be that they would score a pre-employment test and it would be based on merit. And all of our clients passed with flying colors. Many of them passed with 100% on this test. And the FAA decided that the pool of air traffic controller applicants was too white. And so they flushed that initial test and they adopted a biographical assessment, which you can already hear is an ominous term for a air traffic controller test. And unfortunately, our clients didn't pass that. And we allege that the FAA changed the test in order to gerrymander the racial pool.
In Just the News, they also reported on the lawsuit, which has been ongoing for the last 10 years. They said this: the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, is facing a large class action lawsuit over allegations that it threw out 1,000 would-be air traffic controller jobs because of the race of the applicants during former President Barack Obama's administration. And who knows how many since then, right? It says the lawsuit was filed back in 2015, but resurfaced this week amid concern over hiring practices among air traffic controllers in the wake of the plane collision with a helicopter on Wednesday that killed all 64 people on the plane and 3 people on the helicopter. It says the major lawsuit was filed on behalf of Andrew Begida, a white man who claimed that he was discriminated against based on his race after he was rejected for an air traffic control job despite graduating from Arizona State University's training initiative in 2013 and scoring 100% on his training exam, according to the New York Post. It says the lawsuit centers on allegations that the FAA during the Obama administration dropped a skill-based system for hiring controllers and replaced it with a biographical assessment to boost the number of minority applicants. You could go to school for it, you could score 100% on the test, and that would not matter. You would be barred because of the color of your skin. That's the allegation. And notice the FAA dropped the biographical assessment in 2018, and all applicants must take their air traffic skill assessment ATSA now, although we'll have to see what also happened during the Biden administration when they brought back a lot of the Obama-era policies. But look, again, it's likely this is just going to be one of many cases, one of many examples we see being rolled out right now, because the impact of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a long list of other discriminatory policies, these things are getting right now subjected to further review. People are losing their jobs for it. People are being investigated for it. Practices are being reviewed throughout the government for this right now. And again, we will see, was this in fact just reverse discrimination under the guise of anti-discrimination? That said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, first question. Seymour Butts. It's good to see you back, by the way. Seymour, you're saying, who would want to bomb a place as toxic and devastated as Chernobyl? That just sounds crazy. Yeah, so those of you who came in late, a drone bombed Chernobyl, and it actually pierced the nuclear shield on the reactor. Now, this has brought up questions of, who would do this right when Trump's trying to negotiate peace? This is purely my take on it, because I'm trying to figure out, well, who would do this and why would they do it? This is purely my take. Why attack Chernobyl, first off? If a country actually intended to cause a nuclear disaster, why would they attack Chernobyl and not one of the other nuclear plants, especially the ones right in the middle of the war zones? Chernobyl is a bit off track, meaning if you strike it, it's a bit off the beaten path of the war. There are actual reactors, nuclear facilities, kind of on the battlefield, and you could strike those and say it was a misfire. There's plausible deniability involved. It's less it's still problematic, but it's less controversial. The issue is, one of the reasons Chernobyl was such a big deal, because had they had a full meltdown, had it actually gone really bad, it would have made large swaths of Europe uninhabitable for a long time. It would have caused a region-wide nuclear disaster. Same thing with many of these other nuclear plants in that area. If you cause a nuclear disaster, it's not even going to matter who controls Ukraine or a lot of the region around it for that matter. It will not be inhabitable by anybody for years. And so it would be stupid. There's no reason to do it unless you just want to make sure that, nobody gets it. Nobody gets to play with this sandcastle. I'm kicking it down. That'd be kind of the message being sent. Who would be interested in doing this? Well, first of all, back on Chernobyl. So why attack Chernobyl instead of one of these other plants if the intent is to create nuclear disaster? My personal take is that the intent was not to create nuclear disaster. They would have done it somewhere else if that was the intent. This was purely, at least in my analysis, somebody trying to send a message. And Chernobyl is better for sending a message because Chernobyl has historical significance, and Chernobyl is more of it's a meme. It's more familiar to people. Americans know Chernobyl. You might not know the other nuclear plants in Ukraine. Most of us can't even pronounce the names of these nuclear plants. They're like really long, Ukrainian or Russian names. And so Chernobyl has extra significance because it is known. And the impact of a disaster happening there, most of the world knows what that means because, again, it's become part of our history. Most people know about Chernobyl. This was done purely to send a message, at least in my interpretation. It also was not done in such a way that would have caused an actual nuclear disaster, meaning that was also not the intent. They could have done it on a much larger scale. They could have done it in a much more targeted way. There's not really stuff defending it. It would have been easy. This was purely about sending a message. Who would want to send a message like that? Russia, in my analysis, some of the accusations about Trump's peace deal are kind of true. Russia's making out pretty dang well. Ukraine is not being given access to NATO. They're not being given membership, which was one of the things proposed, meaning that's in Russia's interest. Ukraine is not getting back all the territory it had fought for and tried to win back. That's very much in Russia's interest. The United States is not getting involved in any long-term conflict. That's in Russia's interest. Europe is being forced to pay more money and put their military up. That's arguably not in Russia's interest, although if Europe becomes more strong militarily, the NATO allies, that's against their interest. But really, it is true. Russia is making out better on Trump's deal than many people originally thought they would. Why would they do this then, right when they're on the cusp of a peace deal? I personally don't see this being something they would be interested in doing. Who else would do it? I don't know. I have no idea. Who's talking about dragging out the war right now? Germany, other countries, Ukraine, they're talking about dragging out the war. Although that might just be kind of a ruse because they want to have more cards on the negotiating table. I would also add to this the wild card of China or maybe a terrorist organization, which is not really being discussed right now. I think the CCP would have interest in doing this. I think the CCP would have interest in carrying out that attack as well. And if they did it, they would go through a proxy. They'd go through a terrorist group. They'd go through a rebel group. They'd do it on a small scale that is not traceable. But that would also, if they could drag it out, if they could make Europe and Russia reject America's peace plan, the alternate peace plan is China's peace plan. And this is kind of what's being left out of the discussion. There are only really two peace plans for Ukraine, U.S. or China. And if the U.S. one gets rejected and America pulls out, all that's left is China. And so I do think it would be in their interest to do this as well. But again, this is purely me just speculating on it based on my own analysis and my own knowledge of geopolitics. That's my take on it. Jeremy Barker, you're saying, wars make money for some people, peace makes money for others. Yeah, right? Well, that's also one of the big arguments coming out. RFK Jr. has been talking about this. He's basically saying the whole thing is a money laundering operation. I think Volodymyr Zelensky, frankly, I can understand where he's coming from. In his eyes, they were attacked. Again, a lot of their young men have been killed, and it's terrible. When it's easy for people to talk about a war when you're not involved in a war. It's easy to talk about suffering when you're not the one suffering. You know what I mean? During some of his interviews, and I've watched some of what he said, he's talking about the mothers who lost their children. He's talking about the families who lost a son or lost a cousin or lost a brother. He's talking about pretty much the decimation of a lot of their country. And Trump has said, and I believe this is true, that a lot more people have died in that war than we're being told. On Russia's side, they allege that Europe basically violated some of the red line policies, and that's why they did it. Russia's dragged up this war a lot. There's this saying in Chinese, what is it? When riding a tiger, it's hard to dismount. Russia's found itself in a difficult position because were they to just surrender, Putin could be charged as a war criminal. Putin has the oligarchy. He has other powerful forces in Russia. China's pressuring him. They're saying, why is it taking you so long to win this war? The original plan was kind of like a blitzkrieg strategy. They wanted to roll in, rapidly take, a couple areas like Crimea, lock it down, and that would be the end of it. 1 week, boom, over. And it's dragged on now for like more than 2 years. And also they're losing a lot of men to the point where they had to bring in like North Koreans and such. Chinese money from the CCP is regarded as like the key enabler for the war. Russia is now dependent on China for that. And Russia has become they've kind of entered a subordinate position to the CCP through their dependence on them, especially as it relates to, the possibility of them facing war crime charges if they lose this thing. And so they're in a very tough position also because of probably miscalculations. Now, what do you do in a situation like that? Well, I don't personally believe either side wants to keep this war going. This kind of reminds me of like a schoolyard fight where two kids, maybe they get in a scuffle and everybody around them is now like pushing them at each other, saying, fight. And I don't think either of them wants to be in that position right now because they've lost so many young men. They don't have the money for it. And the only way this can be sustained right now is through outside support, whether it's Ukraine getting support from the United States or from Europe for that matter, which Europe is now saying they want to fill that power vacuum, or Russia getting support from, ironically, North Korea, but also the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think either of them are in a position where they want to keep this going or are really even capable of keeping it going. And so it's the outside forces forcing them to keep it going. It's a very rough position, I think. Again, when it comes to war, it's easy to talk about it when you're not being harmed by it. And so I try to be a bit sensitive when it comes to the issues like this. But, that's kind of my take on it, right? James Dyson, you're saying people who are criticizing Doge can't see why it's such a big deal to see your tax money that comes right out of your earnings being used for useless and senseless reasons all over the place that does not benefit them is okay somehow. Yeah, in my opinion, this is kind of where partisanship tends to skew the view of reality. Okay, preview. In some future episodes, I'm going to be reviewing some of the Obama era policies. A lot of what you're seeing Doge doing right now and Trump doing right now, cutting waste, cutting government agencies, reducing spending, looking at stupid projects and cutting them. Obama did a lot of this. And remember, I'd say a lot of swing voters and a lot of middle-of-the-road people and a lot of people who wanted to see change in this country, a lot of them voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. Because early Obama administration, what was he talking about? He wasn't saying DEI or race-based hiring or all this other stuff that we saw, in his second term in office. He was saying cutting waste. He was saying changing the culture in Washington. He was actually saying a lot of the same things Trump was saying. And a lot of people voted for him who later voted for Trump based on those exact same policies. In the early Obama administration, he created a lot of policies to cut government spending. And a lot of the same things you're hearing from Doge right now, where they're saying that, this is the executive branch of the government, we have the right to cut spending, Congress can't block us from doing it, and Trump's being sued for it. Obama did the same thing. In fact, coming up, and maybe in a couple days, I'm going to show you some of these videos. I'm going to show you the actual videos from the Obama administration where they were talking about this. And, even Doge, even the Department of Government Efficiency is just the renaming of an Obama-era agency started in 2014, which was the United States Digital Service, where we're just watching an Obama policy be rolled out. That's all this is. Although on a much larger scale, right? Without a doubt, critics of it, they're right in saying the scale is much larger. But on that point, a lot of the legal challenges probably will not hold up against legal precedents. And I do think it's very interesting right now that what Doge is also is a public information service. Elon Musk simultaneously, being in charge of Doge as a special government employee, which is a legal action, which you cannot really challenge. It is very legally solid. And I've gone over this. A lot of legal challenges are stupid. They're probably going to fail, but they need something, right? It's a legal government office. Simultaneously, he's a special government employee carrying out this review and audit of basically all federal spending. And he's simultaneously also the guy in charge of what is now the largest free speech platform, X, formerly known as Twitter. And he's using these simultaneously. He's on one side investigating, and he is finding all the stuff our money's been spent on. And at the same time, he has a massive public information campaign where they're just releasing, this is what your money was going to. This is what they were spending your money on. These were the people benefiting from it. And Musk is even personally commenting on it about corruption and misuse and everything else. In fact, one of the recent moves of the Doge department, they created individual Twitter handles for all the government agencies they're currently investigating. And the way that Doge works, and this is partly through the way that Obama created this organization, the United States Digital Service, but also through the additional measures Trump created through executive order, which allow for the hiring of special government employees. It created within every government agency a Doge cell. Every Doge cell has a minimum of 4 employees. And I know people were saying, oh, he hired these 19-year-old kids and stuff. That's a very small picture of it. Wired magazine, they revealed the identities of some of the employees, and most media have just been piggybacking on that. In reality, they've hired like 200 people. And what they do is these exist in every single agency. Every single one has to have an HR, human resources agent. Every single one has a lawyer. Every single one has an engineer, at least one. And every single one has a team leader. There's a minimum of 4 employees in every single government agency that they've hired, and they've placed them under the special government hiring process. And what they're doing basically is they're using digital tools to collect all the information within the agency, and they're then working in collaboration with the head of that agency to identify problematic areas. And so technically this is going through, what Doge is doing is really just flagging. They're flagging problematic things for review, and that's being reviewed both by the head of the agency in collaboration with Doge, and then reported back to the main Doge department, which is under the White House, going to Elon Musk and President Trump. And that's the way this thing actually works. It's not like Elon Musk is personally cutting things. It's not like he's personally doing that. He's merely using tools, AI tools in this case, which is part of the power given to Doge through the Obama administration, through its original agency, again, the USDS, and again, flagging it to kind of raise alarm over potential issues. It's a very interesting way they're doing it. And again, America is getting a pretty clear view on everything that's coming out from it. They've also now launched an official Doge website, which is also publishing all these findings. And so again, investigations, mass public awareness campaign. And that's a very interesting way to go about it. Let's see here. Wow's in my pants, you're saying. And real quick on that too. The effect this is having is that you do have government officials and lawyers and activist groups and frankly, a lot of government employees very unhappy about this because they're the ones being personally impacted by it. And also it seems a lot of the government spending was deeply partisan. The Democrats seem to have made out way more with a lot of this than the Republicans, although we'll see when they start auditing like the Department of Defense and stuff. And so this is kind of dismantling a lot of the activist arms and a lot of the funding to NGOs and activist groups that do tend to align politically with the Democrats. And so they're being damaged significantly in terms of funding and in terms of grassroots support. And also, it seems that Democrat voters, they're more concerned about mass migration stuff and deportations. They're more concerned about, the stuff more happening on the ground. A lot of them are more focused on Gaza and stuff. And Trump saying he wants to make Gaza the You know, kind of the new like beachfront property of the United States in the Middle East. You know what I mean? They're more unhappy about that, right? Anyways, folks, that's generally how I see it. Back to the point. Wow's it my pants, you're saying, Josh, you're saying it is amazing what people tell themselves to be okay with discrimination, but somehow fighting for equality is a crime. Yeah, you know, that's actually the really hard place to get caught in, because most genocides, right, because when people talk about discrimination, the biggest argument against it is that people eventually can use it to justify murder or, you know, ethnic cleansing or genocide just outright. When Democrats talk about it, they oftentimes talk about the Holocaust and, you know, the price of discrimination. It starts out just name calling, it then gets into political name calling, it then results in restrictive policies, and eventually results in the mass killing of individuals, right? That is kind of why they say free speech is dangerous. It's why they say discrimination should be stopped immediately. It's because they claim there's a trajectory to it, which at the very end of it does mean genocide. The issue is, a lot of times, the way communist groups and socialist groups, and remember the Nazis were the National Socialist Party, they were socialists. You see the exact same thing being done. The Nazis weren't saying, you know, carry out genocide because we hate these people. They were saying these people have an unfair hold of wealth. These people have harmed you. These people have an unfair hold on power. And that's the same narrative you had in Russia, where they were killing the wealthy peasants. These people have an unfair hold on grain and production. That's the same narrative they had in China when they were killing all the landlords. These people have an unfair hold on wealth and an unfair hold on the ability of people to live, and therefore should be, you know, systematically murdered, right? By the way, you know, the Epoch Times CEO, Janice, you know, her family was persecuted in China. She grew up in one of the prison camps, actually, of the CCP, because, you know, the families, if you were part of a wealthy family, you had to go to these like labor camps, and even the kids had to go there. Our CEO was one of those kids, you know, just one point with this. You know, in Cambodia, when they were, you know, killing all the city people and stuff, they were saying that it's the educated people, the people who went to college, the people who are wealthy, who are abusing you or whatever else, and therefore should all be killed. And they killed about a third of the entire population of the country. There's always a false form of justice, a false narrative of justice that is used to make the people who are carrying out murder and genocide and these terrible things believe that they're the good guys. And I would actually say it's the same narratives we have here, although it was not carried out that far. But what is the narrative of New York Times and their fake 1619 project, where they rewrote American history and falsified American history, right? The narrative is all this anti-white stuff. White people are the ones who are to blame. What is the narrative of all the stuff they have being taught in schools, ironically based on the New York Times fake 1619 project, which their own fact checkers flagged as being fake, by the way, and they still published it. The narrative your kids are being taught in school is America is fundamentally evil. The founding fathers are fundamentally evil. Everything America is should be wiped out and reformed, and white people are the ones to blame for all of it. That's what they're being taught. You have anti-Christian propaganda. You have basically propaganda against any kind of orthodox religious group, right? They discriminate against most, I'd say, upright religious people. Unless you follow like Satanism, you know, you're probably being discriminated by them, ironically. If you follow an evil religion, you're probably okay. And that's just the way it works. But any of these people were labeled. All these people are being attacked. All these people are being discriminated against under a false sense of justice. And they've even rewritten the idea of what it means to be racist by saying racism is only racist if it's against these people, but all these people are allowed to be racist against these people, which is absolute ridiculous nonsense. It is the stupidest time in history. I think when we go back in the future, we look back, we're going to see just like a form of mass psychosis that overtook this country and was used to carry out what is the most ridiculous forms of discrimination probably this country has seen since I don't know, post-slavery era. Some of the worst forms of discrimination we've seen, and a reversal of everything we've accomplished on fighting against that, under the guise, ironically, of fighting against the very thing they've come to represent. Just total hypocrisy. And I do think it's being cleaned out and exposed right now. But back to that point. There's oftentimes a narrative that is created to make people feel morally justified to carry out immoral acts. And you almost always find that with criminals and war criminals and terrible people. They always find a way to justify their evil acts to themselves. And racial justice, ironically, being one of the worst types of injustice, was, I believe at least, a carrying out of that very principle. Ashley from California, you're saying, why would anyone think DEI is a good hiring practice for things like air traffic control? Isn't competence much more important? I don't care what they look like as long as they're the best at what they do when it comes to our safety. I agree. If my house catches on fire and my daughter's trapped in her bedroom, I would want the most capable person to go and rescue her. You know what I mean? If I'm flying in an airplane and I don't want my airplane to crash into a helicopter and crash into a river and kill me and my family, I would want the best people in charge making sure that doesn't happen, right? If I deal with any kind of policy, right? If I deal with any kind of policy, whether it's just making sure the subways or the buses run on time, I would prefer having them be on time because they're hiring the people most qualified for the job. Now, the counter argument to that, which is the one that's been prevailing in this country for a while now, is that, well, what about the people who can't get jobs because they don't have qualifications? Well, I'm sorry, but you got to push yourself. Whose fault is it if you don't apply yourself? Now, you could argue that it's very hard to come up when you're at the bottom, right? If you feel that life has not been kind to you and you were denied the opportunities some would have. I would say there are alternate tracks. You don't often jump from 0 to 10. You have to jump from 0 to 1, 2, 3 and work your way up to achieving success. I think the idea of letting some people cut the line because they didn't apply themselves earlier in life is not fair to the people who actually did apply themselves earlier in life. And I would also argue that it actually makes it so that people don't bother to apply themselves. Gee, I'm the wrong color of skin. I will never be allowed to get this job, so why try in the first place? A lot of people might be considering that, right? I don't think it's fair to anybody. I would actually say, too, there are mid-level jobs. I've had all kinds of random jobs. I worked at a pizza place. I've worked at an ice cream shop on the boardwalk. I did an actual internship, an apprenticeship as doing construction. I've operated heavy machinery. My stepdad, he does heavy machinery. I've done that. I learned how to grade with, when you have to, again, level out land. I've done that. I've had all kinds of random jobs. I went to massage school. I'm actually a certified massage therapist, Swedish massage. I've done all kinds of random stuff like this. I've worked at restaurants. I've worked at multiple restaurants, in fact. I have all kinds of random work experience. And of course, I've been a journalist, going on pretty close to 20 years now. And on the side, I started a nonprofit poetry organization, the Society of Classical Poets, with one of my good friends. I've done all kinds of random stuff. And I wouldn't expect to be able to go to the FAA and say, hey, hire me. I would understand that there's a qualification process for that. You know what I mean? You got to kind of work your way up. And you can't just assume that there's not going to be some kind of process of effort. In life, you're going to fail a lot before you succeed. You know what I mean? One thing my grandpa on my mom's side always taught me growing up, he said, you're never going to be good at something when you first start. You're never going to be good at something when you first start. There has to be a process where you develop skills. And I think in that same line, you can't just quit because you don't feel you have opportunities, but you also can't expect to go from, if you play baseball, they're not just going to let you into the major leagues when you've never played the game before. You got to probably start off playing with some friends and then work your way up to a smaller team and then work your way up before you think you're going to be able to compete in the big leagues. If you want to fight professionally, I did martial arts a lot of my life. If you want to fight, and I'm not nearly in as good a shape as I used to be, if you want to fight professionally, would it be nice to let a guy who hasn't trained in 20 years to go fight in the MMA? No, he's going to get hurt. You got to work your way up, right? You got to become qualified before you're allowed to have it. And hard work and applying yourself and probably failing a lot along the way is how you get there. I think these things are ridiculous when you try to, mess with the game to let unqualified people do something they're not qualified for. It's not nice to them. It's not nice to anybody they're responsible for. It's a terrible policy, I think. Anyways, folks, that's my take on these things. But yeah. Anyways, happy Monday. I hope you all are having a good week so far. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to be on the road again, doing some events and stuff. So you'll be seeing me from like an Airbnb. But folks, I said, join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Please share this video. Help us get the word out. Give us a like. Helps us as well. That said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.